Welcome back into the CBB Central podcast. It's been almost 2 weeks since we last recorded, Brad. Our last episode only went out about eight or 10 days ago. I was on a little bit of a vacation. Brad was moving apartments, so figured it was a nice little week off for us before getting right back into college hoops because we got a lot of work to do with less than 2 months to go before the season. We got conference previews coming up in a couple of weeks that we'll get our plans out to you guys on Twitter about that. We're going to have some fun guests that I know you guys will love. So we're super excited about that. Going to have this episode and probably one more episode of deep dive previews. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed that. Hopefully that's how you guys have found our podcast. Thanks for listening. If so, but a lot of news, as I said, Brad, since we last got into it. But first off, how you doing, my man? It's been a while.
Pretty good. Moved out of Rhode Island for the first time in my life, all the way to Massachusetts, halfway across the country.
Speaking of across the country, I spent my last week in Wyoming with some friends, checking out some national parks, checking out some nature. Good break from basketball. My friends were getting on me for being on Twitter too much. I thought I was on Twitter very little. It was a good time, but just a great trip to kind of clear the mind, clear the headspace before I go back to school, before college hoops gets going. So glad to be back and back grinding on the hoops thing. Biggest news I would say of the time we were gone, Nico Mannion to Arizona, and obviously it means a lot that a player like Mannion commits to Arizona, one of the top players nationally in the 2019 rankings, an elite point guard who's been on a high major trajectory for quite a while. But I think really the most interesting part of this is it's just the clear signal that we're not worried about USC, we're not worried about Arizona, we're not worried about Louisville, the schools that have been hit by the FBI stuff, especially the school that kept it coach in USC, has the number one class in 19 as of last count. And then obviously now Arizona getting Mannion. I think Jeff Goodman said it best. It's really more about stability than it is about actually, having coaches that follow the rules or don't. People were decommitting from schools during the FBI investigation or early stages, not because they were worried about the cheaters that were running those programs, that they were worried about the instability. And now that it appears that both of those programs have some stability, they're able to kind of get back going on recruiting. And I'm not going to speculate as to whether Sean Miller is cheating to get Nico Mannion. I wouldn't necessarily expect it. But regardless, I think it's just super interesting to see how quickly things have turned back in the favor of Coach Miller.
Yeah, and Arizona should be back at the top of the Pac-12 next year. Adding Mannion, and then this whole group of young players who are going to cut their teeth this season, get some more playing time than probably they would have normally gotten on like a typical Arizona team. All those guys coming back front of the year, like your Brandon Williams, who could end up being the starting point guard for Arizona, Brandon Randolph, Manuel Acott, even Chase Jeter, who will be a redshirt senior next season. That's a solid core. And when those guys are older players, add in a talented point guard like Mannion, like a dual point guard backup with Brandon Williams, and this is a really good team. And the Pac-12 continues to recruit exceptionally well. We'll see if that can start to turn into some more consistent performance up and down the conference. It's been kind of a top-heavy league of late, so we'll see. Now Arizona is going to get back up. You mentioned USC's recruiting class. See if a couple Pac-12 teams can put together some momentum.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think the four schools that have recruited the best out of the Pac-12: Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Arizona. Three of those schools have coaches whose reputations are that they're better recruiters than coaches. Sean Miller, Andy Enfield, and Steve Alford. Now, obviously, Alford's future seems a little bit more tenuous than the other two, but those guys have always gotten players kind of underwhelmed with it. We'll see. It's an interesting trajectory given what the SEC is doing and landing such talent. Well, is that something we're going to build that reputation for many of these SEC programs, including one we'll talk about today in Vanderbilt, who are recruiting at such a high level, LSU, another one. Will they be able to consistently live up to the talent that they're bringing in? Those programs so far have shown an inability to do so under their current coaches. We'll see what happens, though. Just kind of throughout the landscape, I think that's always fascinating, which schools use their talent the best and most and least efficiently, if you will.
I think the second biggest commitment is not the next highest rated player to come off the board in the past 2 weeks, but I think that's Jalen Williams going to Auburn. Auburn is sneaky putting together a really strong recruiting class in what should be, they have kind of a kind of a veteran roster this year. They have a lot of juniors. I think they have 6 juniors. So with this 2019 class, will be freshmen when that class is seniors. Guys like Jalen Williams, Isaac Okoro, they'll be able to kind of be the next era of Auburn basketball. So Auburn needed a really big recruiting class. So far, they've gotten four commits, if I'm not mistaken, 2 top 100, and they are the heavy favorites for Tyrell Jones, who's a 4-star point guard who should be committing relatively soon, it seems like. So Auburn is here to stay. This is not a flash in the pan. That's my second biggest commitment of the past couple weeks.
Yeah, definitely. Bruce Pearl can always recruit. That's never something we've doubted, if you will. But he's certainly doing a good job. And I think looking at just timelines is something you made a great point of with these juniors going into their senior year, the year these guys come freshmen. It's just a great time to land a class that Auburn is. They're at number 6 in the early rankings. I know that's a bit of a pet peeve we were just discussing, but they're doing a great job out at Auburn. Louisville also doing a great job. Chris Mack landing multiple recent commitments. They got Jalen Withers, number 87 of the composite, a versatile combo forward from Ohio, and Samuel Williamson, who's number 44 in the composite, a 6'6" wing, can really score the ball. They already had Josh Nickelberry, who's a top 100 in this class. They were out visiting Aiden Agihone, one of the top recruits in this class, a big man in Ireland. They were visiting his parents in Ireland, which I thought was a nice gesture. That would be another fit that I like a lot, and I would be very surprised. I wouldn't be very surprised, but I'd be pretty surprised if they don't land him. They're also in on a guy like Robbie Barron, who's a stock riser in July, who I think is very much a Chris Mack type player, really shoot the ball, combo forward. So Chris Mack doing a really good job in this 19 class. It's so critical given I know we've discussed a little bit, Brad. They don't have a ton of talent on this roster. They need a big talent boost in 19. That's what Chris Mack's apparently going to give them.
Yeah, great start with these 3 commits. Definitely need a point guard because Kristen Cunningham, the point guard for this year, is grad transfer. This is going to be his only year at Louisville. They have Darius Perry, who will be a junior next season. He's a sophomore this year. He's more of a scorer. I know that they're involved with David Johnson, who is a former Louisville commit under Rick Pitino. He's a top 100 guy. That'll be an important guy to keep. Even if they don't get David Johnson, they definitely need a high-level point guard in this class. I know that they're in the final list for Ramsey, who I think is going to Texas Tech. At least that's where the crystal ball is leaning there, Jamius Ramsey. And then it looks like Louisville's also recruiting 1, if not 2 bigs. You mentioned Iggy Hahn, and they're going after a couple of kind of top 200 centers, more of like project guys. Like Jason Jatobo and Orlando Robinson both have kind of mid-major offers mostly, but if Louisville can add one of those, a point guard and Aiden Iggy-Hahn, I mean, talk about reloading.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty special to watch. There's just been so many commitments. I've kind of lost track. Christian Braun went off the board last night to Kansas, a top 150 guy, can really shoot the ball. He an in-state product. Bill Self likes to add these kind of the occasional 4-year player. He likes to really have a mix, have 1 or 2 one-and-dones, and then several 4-year players. Braun fits that 4-year player type of build as a solid wing player.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Sam Williamson, who we talked about earlier, the crystal ball was leaning heavily for him to Kansas, and then it started to shift after his visit to Louisville. Christian Braun pops early in the day, also at that wing position, kind of writing on the wall. We figured Sam Williamson would not be going to Kansas. But, I mean, this is a solid pickup for Kansas. You mentioned that Bill Self likes to have a couple guys that aren't super highly rated recruits. Kind of reminds me of his team a few years ago that was, I think, a 1 seed. It had guys like Travis Relaford and Elijah Johnson, who were like 5th-year seniors, I think. They had, I think his name was Kevin Young. Is that it? He was a transfer from Loyola Marymount, really good glue guy, power forward. So, I mean, all across the rosters, guys like Brady Morningstar too, going back years. But that's something that Bill Self likes to do, and Braun should definitely fit that mold. In terms of where Kansas goes from here, they're certainly in the mix for guys like Matthew Hurt and Jeremiah Robinson Earl at the 4 and 5 respectively. Not really sure who else that they're going to get. They just got a decommitment from Marquise Jacobs. So I mean, Kansas is going to be in great shape regardless. Solid pickup for them.
Yeah, I completely agree with pretty much everything you had to say there. A couple other top-ish recruits that have popped. Demir Bishop to Xavier. He was heavily recruited by several programs, and Travis Steele continues to get it done. A very talented wing who played for Kalo Elite this summer on the Adidas circuit.
Yeah, Xavier really needed a scorer after Elias King decommitted. They have now three front court players, including 2 top 150 guys, Daniel Ramsey and Zach Fremantle. They needed that kind of scorer on the wing. They now also need a point guard, and they're going to be in a 3-way dogfight, it looks like, for Jalen Gaffney, who's a top 100 point guard, between UConn, St. John's, and Xavier. They all need a point guard. I think Xavier can offer the easiest path to playing time, given Gooden will be a senior when Gaffney's a freshman. But Bishop's a guy who's going to slide in there, give him a lot of scoring and three-point shooting off the bench.
Yeah, and speaking of UConn, they got a big commitment today as well. James Boonite, number 78 in the composite. He's a guy I've been tracking for quite a while. Was a mid-major prospect last summer and has just continued to get better, gotten stronger, had an awesome late summer after being injured for much of the spring. Boonite, he can really shoot the ball. He's very smooth. I'm a really big fan of this pickup for Danny Hurley.
Yeah, he's a really good fit at UConn, especially in Hurley's offense. Hurley's going to want to play multiple guards. He has good size. He can shoot it. He's a good athlete. I think UConn's still looking to add another guard and then a 4 and a 5 in this class. And I mentioned Jalen Gaffney earlier. They're also in the mix for Alamir Dawes, who's from New Jersey, combo guard, top 150 kid. I think St. John's is in on Alamir Dawes. Providence is in on Alamir Dawes. Can't remember those schools off the top of my head, but there's about 6 that I think will still be in contention for him. So UConn's not done even after landing this top 100 guard in terms of adding to their backcourt.
Yeah, absolutely. And a trio of point guards that went off the board. I think we can more just rattle these off. None of these super highly rated recruits, but guys, I think we're worth mentioning on the podcast. Daniel Bowie commits to Northwestern, a big stock riser playing for Mass Rivals this summer. Commits on the first day of his official visit. Thank God he did, because he might not have wanted to after that Akron loss in football that I'm sure he was there for that night. Don't remind me. But Bowie off to Northwestern. They desperately needed a lead guard. Then Marquise Kennedy, number 175 in the composite, a massive get for Loyola Chicago, keeping Kid at home. They're doing a really good job in this recruiting class at 19, one that they desperately needed to be big coming off the Final Four bid, and with a big group graduating between Custer and Marquise Towns after the season. And finally, Noah Fernandez, who is one of my favorite point guard prospects in this class, maybe not the highest rated, but just super tough, plays with a lot of energy, can shoot the ball, goes off the board to Wichita State. Tough blow for some schools like UMass and Temple that invested a lot of time into him. But Wichita State gets a guy who I think could be the point guard of the future down there.
Yeah, they also got a kind of a late stock riser in the class of 2018, Jamarius Burton. This is Wichita State that I'm referring to. So they've done a great job of kind of elevating their recruiting as they move to a stronger conference, being the AAC. They're still not consistently getting the top 100 guys that maybe you would think, given how successful they've been on the court these past few years. I mean, they have a guy in Marcus McDuffie who was a top 100 recruit. Fred VanVleet was a top 100 recruit as well. But this looks to still be a team that's going to thrive on veteran rosters, kind of developing borderline 4-star and high 3-star level talent.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's really just the MO of what Coach Marshall can do, and I just love the way he. I love the guys he recruits. I always find myself higher on Greg Marshall recruits than I do on like the average recruit. Like when I see a guy come into Wichita State, I'm like I was higher on that guy throughout the process than most. I think he just really does a good job of recruiting smart basketball players, guys who know how to win, guys who stock rows late. He does a good job getting in early on those type of guys. So always does a good job, Greg Marshall out at Wichita State.
Kind of sticking on the recruiting kind of topic, we have 2 5-stars that have cut down their list considerably and are looking to commit very soon, presumably. We talked about Scotty Lewis a little bit earlier. He's down to Florida and Kentucky. Florida picked up a preferred walk-on commitment from his high school teammate, Alex Klatsky, who I think is a shooter. Obviously, as a preferred walk-on, he's not going to make too much of an impact. Certainly does not hurt Florida's chances. So Kevin, where do you see Scotty Lewis's recruitment going from here?
All the buzz is Florida. I think I'll bet on that as well. Mike White's done a great job recruiting him. He's no longer going to team up with Brian Antoine at Duke, which was kind of a discussion at one point that they were a package deal, and Duke was involved with both. So I think a lot of people were sort of connecting the dots. Now that they miss on Antoine to Villanova, I think he really paved the way for Scotty Lewis to wind up at Florida over Kentucky, who was the final two.
I agree. I mean, Florida has an easier path to playing time. I mean, he'll have to compete with Keontae Johnson and DeAndre Ballard on the wing, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Although I do like Keontae Johnson a lot as kind of like a sleeper prospect for this upcoming season. I think Kentucky, they have kind of a weird projected roster for next year, given normally there's a lot of turnover in terms of the NBA draft. Not a whole lot of clear NBA prospects. At least one and done prospects on this team, especially in the 1 through 3 positions, where you could get a scenario where you're starting Ashton Hagans as a sophomore, Quade Green as a junior, and then I mean they'll probably sell up quickly. They'll have Tyrese Maxey, a lot of mouths to feed there. I think Florida is the safer route. Although I mean Scotty Lewis is a top 10, top 15 player. He will play wherever he goes. And then another interesting recruitment that's kind of taken a turn late, where most people were thinking he would go to Duke. Now it looks like Clemson, and that's Josiah James, who was listed as a point guard, but the whole U18 he played small ball for in that kind of Marcus Smart, kind of David Nwaba kind of role. So I'm not sure about that. But so, Kevin, what are your thoughts on Josiah James's recruitment and him as a player?
I haven't seen a ton on James in terms of film. I know he kind of has some of that scrapper in him that you love to see. He was a guy who wasn't playing a lot of like on-circuit basketball, and then got the Coach K offer, and everybody went nuts trying to see him play. And the fact that he's announcing his commitment right after a Clemson official visit has to feel pretty good if you're Brad Brownell. Now, obviously, given the Zion Williamson stuff last season, I don't think a Clemson fan will ever be too confident going into a recruit's, especially a 5-stars commitment again. But if my money would be on Clemson for this one, and what a big one it would be for Coach Brownell, who has often been maligned for his recruiting abilities. And missing on Zion was certainly a big one. But between the winning last year and now with potential to land a guy like James, that would be a program changer.
Especially because with Sheldon Mitchell and Marquise Reed leaving with a starting backcourt, there's a ton of minutes available. Josiah James would probably be the starting point guard as a freshman, even though he's not really a true point guard, unless Clemson were to add like a big-time grad transfer point guard. It is interesting to know that they added Chase Hunter, who's like a scoring combo guard. If they get James, and then there's supposedly the leaders for Christian Brown, who's a top 50 player overall. He's a wing. I mean, that's a big-time recruiting class. It's going to rejuvenate this Clemson team, kind of like what we talked about earlier with Arizona and Auburn and Louisville, helping them reload and kind of keep this positive momentum going.
Yeah, I completely agree. That would be a really impressive class for Brad Brownell to put together. And I also don't think we can kind of understate how teams can use recruiting weekends in the fall to their advantage. You know, getting a guy out for a Clemson football game for a weekend, especially if it's a big one. Now this week, I think they played Georgia Southern, so it's not like you would say, oh, well, that was the type of recruiting, that was the type of big game that would draw all the fans. But bringing you out and seeing the Clemson football atmosphere has to be kind of influential on a recruit. Not to say that they don't have a good basketball atmosphere, although it's definitely not known as one of the great ones in college basketball. I think, you know, if you're recruiting against Duke, for instance, Duke is not going to bring their top recruit out to a football game. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be deciding between Clemson and Duke because of the football game atmosphere, but I think it is one of the things I always monitor in in basketball, and it goes the same way with football and basketball. I know that I read an article about how Gary Patterson was super hyped with how Jamie Dixon's doing at TCU. He used to never bring basketball recruits on official visit the weekend to bring football recruits on official visit during basketball weekends because he didn't want to bring them to basketball games. There was no fans. The team stunk. And that kind of turned things around. So just a random musing. I don't know how much is influencing Josiah James's decision, but they did have a football home game. I think that's always something interesting to monitor.
And then a couple more injury notes here. Cullen Van Leer from Missouri has retired, leaving the Tigers with very little wing depth and even talent on the wing. And then a few other wings on different teams have not been cleared yet due to injuries, and according to John Rothstein, no timetable yet. And that's Luke King for Oregon, Jerry Foster for SMU, and DJ Harvey for Notre Dame. All very, very impactful players.
Yeah, Foster's really important to SMU in an AAC that's super wide open. But Luke King's injury would loom large. I think he's the least important to his team's success just because of the depth that they have. But I would really miss seeing a healthy Luke King early in the year, given how talented he is. I think a lot of people have forgotten about him, given his recruiting ranking kind of tumbled a little bit. But at the same time, he's a super talented kid who I've seen said as one of the most talented players in this class. And so definitely not the crown jewel with Bol in that incoming group for Oregon, but definitely a talent they wouldn't want to miss as they try to contend for a Pac-12 and potentially even a national title.
And then just lastly, before we move into our deep dive previews, Malik Yarborough for Illinois State has been suspended. Not the first time he's been suspended, I think both at St. Louis and at Illinois State. A lot of people have Illinois State as the favorites in the Missouri Valley. Some even have them as an at-large caliber team. I don't have them in either of those spots. I have them second and as a kind of NIT bubble team. But nevertheless, top 75 team, best player suspended. This is a big deal.
Oh, it's massive, and it just frustrates the heck out of me to keep this podcast clean. The amount of chances Malik Yarborough's had and the amount of chances he has thrown away. He was basically kicked off the team at St. Louis. He was in trouble a lot there. And then he got in trouble multiple times at Illinois State. And now he's finally suspended indefinitely. We'll see if he returns. Dan Muller's been known to have I guess the word would be give many strikes, if you will. I know guys like Deontay Hawkins had many off-the-court issues and still wound up playing out their careers at Illinois State. Given how important he is to that team, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets another chance as well. Yarborough does, but you almost feel bad about hoping that he's there, just given the amount of things he's done wrong. This was a hit and run. Just at some point, he has to be punished for the decisions he's making. It would be a huge blow to Illinois State, given how well he fits as that creator wing next to a scoring guard in Keyshawn Evans and do everything post player and Phil Fain. I was one of those who had them second in the Valley, but closer to at-large consideration than I think you did, Brad. But just, man, it frustrates me when kids commit crimes and do things off the court, 5 and 6 times and just continue to get second chances because of the talent.
Couldn't have said it any better myself. Moving on to our, the main purpose of our podcast.
We have one more news. Gino Crandall. Gino Crandall
is
officially going to be eligible. We just talked about it a lot on the podcast and the lead up. It looked like he wouldn't be eligible, but it turns out he can start. I believe what I read was he can start online master's classes in October. So he'll finish up things at North Dakota State, enroll in the first week of October, and be ready to go for the start of the season. We had been kind of expecting that timeline to be the end of the end of the first semester when he'd be eligible. So this is certainly a big addition for the Zags, given how tough a non-conference slate they'll be playing.
Talk about a loophole. He can join either mid-semester or they start a new semester for grad school only on October 1st or whatever, but good for the Zags. Sad for North Dakota, who looks like maybe they could have kept – I mean, probably not. They probably wouldn't have even been able to keep Crandall for his last year, even if he hadn't graduated. He would have probably joined Gonzaga for the second semester. But I think now, before that premature move earlier, we can move on to Georgetown for a deep dive. I'm going to go into kind of a synopsis of them last year before Kevin jumps in on their roster movement. So the Hoyas were 15-15 last year, 94th in KenPom, although they were probably a little better than that. They had a crazy schedule. They played 7 sub-300 teams in the non-conference. I mean, they went out of their way to find the worst teams in the country to play. 5-13 in the Big East, but I mentioned earlier they are probably a little better than that. They were 309th in the country in turnover percentage. That's unlikely to improve this year now with two freshman point guards being the main ball handlers. And they were an excellent rebounding team last year with Jesse Govan and Marcus Derrickson. With Derrickson gone, and looks like Pickett will slide into that 4 spot, likely gonna lose some of that rebounding advantage. They were an excellent free throw shooting team, but guys like Derrickson being one of their few creators, him leaving and adding guys like Caleb Johnson and Jagan Mosley to the lineup probably will reduce that as well. But everyone is pretty much back except for Derrickson, and then Jonathan Wilmore, who saw some time in points, saw some time off the ball. And they have a very strong top 7, but they have a lot of question marks after that.
Yeah, and it's a good incoming group. It's the number 31 class nationally. The biggest signee from a rankings perspective came late, thanks to the firing of Kevin Ollie at UConn. James Akinjo from California, who I believe played for Oakland Soldiers and really had a stock rise throughout his during his AAU summer. He's lightning fast. He had a big summer of like highlight reel stuff, playing in a pro-am in DC called the Kenner League that both him and Mac McClung, who I'll mention in a bit, both played in. He's very likely to be the starting point guard. Josh LeBlanc is an athletic combo forward who should bring a lot defensively right away. Not necessarily going to be the unoffensive factor in the early going, but has a lot of talent and upside in that frame. Grayson Carter, 6'8" 4-man from Dallas, number 235 in the composite. I don't expect him to see many minutes right away. And Mac McClung, kind of the wild card of this group, 245 in the composite. A recruit much more well-known than anyone else in this class for his highlight reel dunks, his relationship with Riff Raff, the hip-hop star. The dude can really bounce. He's a combo guard, a little undersized. It's kind of unclear whether he'll be able to play the point in college, but he's a fun player to watch. I will say, having watched a lot of Mac McClung, I think he's better than that recruiting ranking. I just don't think he's good enough to be warranting the amount of buzz he's getting.
Yeah, I totally agree on Mac McClung. I mean, for better or for worse, he's going to play a pretty significant role. I mean, he's clearly the backup point guard. I know that they used Jagan Mosley at point guard as a freshman. He's now a junior. So that was 2 seasons ago under John Thompson, but that was not a great experiment. He can handle the ball a little bit, but I think having Mosley off the ball, kind of being like a defender and kind of a slasher, is kind of the way to go there. I think one of the most underrated players in the Big East, despite his kind of poor shooting percentages last year, is Javon Blair. He's someone who really outperformed his recruiting ranking and can really shoot the ball and can really provide some much needed wing scoring that was missing last year.
Yeah, I like Blair. I don't want to skip too quickly just into what's the rotation, but I think there's a pretty good chance you play Blair at the 2 spot next to Kinjo, and then you can play Pickett at the 4. You can play Caleb Johnson at the 3, Pickett at the 4, and Jesse Govan at the 5. You could also do a Pickett Josh LeBlanc 3-4 combo. That'd be super versatile and athletic. That could be pretty interesting. I do like Blair. I think he'll score the ball pretty well. As you said, he outplayed that recruiting ranking. A lot was expected of him. I could see that efficiency going up this season just in a more steady role. I think my biggest question that's left unanswered, I mean, you touched on a lot of it, Brad, of this was a better team than the record said last year, but this team was terrible defensively. They were the worst team in the Big Big East defensively. They give 83 points a game in Big East play. Now, they didn't really do anything well on defense. The 2-point field goal percentage against was 53%. That was 8th in the Big East. They gave up 39% from 3. That was 9th. Teams even shot 77% from against them on the foul line. That was 9th in the Big East. Teams got a lot of assists against them. Georgetown didn't block any shots. They didn't do a real good job of forcing turnovers either. And I really don't see why that improves. I think Akinjo will be a bit of an improvement because of his energy at the point of the attack. But at the same time, he's a pretty small guy. I think bigger point guards will be able to abuse him a little bit, especially as a freshman. Govan's not exactly a rim protector. Derrickson wasn't a huge benefit or negator, if you will, on defense. I think playing LeBlanc could help a little bit, but how do you see that defense shaping up, Brad? Because I think it's a really big concern that I don't see why Georgetown will improve necessarily on that side of the ball this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Jesse Govan is one of the best players in the Big East. He's so talented offensively, but he's not very mobile in terms of like defense. And you mentioned earlier, he doesn't really protect the rim. And then they had a guy like Marcus Derrickson playing the 4, also not super mobile, more of like a shooter, and then playing Pickett up at the 3. I mean, the whole lineup was just kind of built around offense, I guess, and not the most advantageous defensive kind of formation there. I mean, they have some good individual defenders, guys like Caleb Johnson and Jagan Mosley. So I think that they could be okay. It's all going to depend, I think, if they can maintain their rebounding by sliding a guy like Pickett to the 4. Now, I mean, Josh LeBlanc is going to play a lot, and when he plays, he'll be at the 4. So maybe that could help. But typically, a good defensive team is more veteran laden. This team is still very young. I mean, between the 2 freshman point guards, Blair and Pickett are sophomores. LeBlanc's a freshman. So I think the youth could even make this defense even worse.
Right. I think that's that in the backcourt really is what held them back last year. I mean no offense to Trey Dickerson, Jonathan Mulmore, Jagan Mosley, and Javon Blair, but that backcourt isn't winning in the Big East, especially when you're playing a Villanova team that had Dante DiVincenzo and Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges. When you're playing like literally top to bottom, like even DePaul had Max Strus and Eli Kane, which is a pretty good backcourt. Providence had Kyron Carrade, Alpha Diallo, Makai Ashton Langford, who struggled but is a top 100 recruit. Like just up and down the Big East, like Seton Hall had Kadeem Carrington and Desi Rodriguez. Every team in the Big East had strong backcourts. This was the worst backcourt in the Big East, in my estimation, like a fairly significant margin. And Akinjo helps a lot here. Mac McClung helps a little bit here. Is it enough to? Is league average guard play enough to put Georgetown into NCAA tournament contention?
I don't think so. Because even if, all right, let's do like a kind of like an informal, kind of loose ranking of like the Big East point guards. All right, so James Akinjo, you say he's probably better than Devin Gage. Say he's probably better than Aaron Thompson for Butler. You could even say he's better than Makai Ashton Langford for Providence. But after that, I mean, we'll get into like Quincy McKnight.
Give me him over McKnight, but I'm probably the biggest McKnight hater out there. So,
all right. I mean, he's certainly not better than Quentin Gooden.
No,
probably not better than Javon Quinterly, given where they're ranked in the same class. I mean, even if we go back to Providence and say, I mean, David Duke was ranked significantly higher than James Akinjo, probably about 40 spots ahead. What teams? A Marquette with a veteran like Joe Chartouni, I would say has better point guard play. So I think you have like the 5th or 6th, maybe even 7th best point guard in the Big East, and then you have these kind of wings that are kind of flawed, kind of one-dimensional. The defense isn't great, relatively inexperienced, but I mean you have this big-time center. It's a weird group of pieces here.
Right, like Govan is super fun. I mean, he can stretch the floor. He's great in post-ups. Rebounds the ball extremely well. I mean, his development was really fun. He even was a pretty good passer for them last season. I think building an offense around him is super feasible, and I think Akinjo is going to be really good. I think he'll be on the Big East all-rookie team. I think he's going to have a really solid year. The question is, I think anything that makes this offense good enough detracts from their defense. Like, they could play a pure spacer in George Malinowski, who's coming in as a transfer, sat out last season, coming over from William and Mary. Greg Malinowski, excuse me. He can really shoot the ball, but he's undersized and not very athletic. He would hurt their defense big time. A Caleb Johnson, like, do you play him over a Caleb Johnson, or do you play a Pickett at the 3 over Caleb Johnson because you want Pickett's ability to score the ball? Like, it feels like every move, like this, it feels like this roster is still a bit in flux and doesn't have the requisite depth, the requisite pieces to be a fully functioning unit that's an NCAA tournament contender. I think I'm coming down on them as I preview them, if you will.
So I think that we should go into the rotation here.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
I mentioned the clear top 7 earlier. To me, that's Akinjo, Blair, Johnson, Pickett, and Govan as your starters. Then Mosley and LeBlanc at 6 and 7. Extending that out to 9, I think Mac McClung would be the clear number 8 there as the backup point guard. And then number 9 is kind of where it gets a little more murky. I think it's probably going to be one of the bigs. So that, for me, that comes down to Antoine Walker, who's like a 6'9", has some skill, kind of more of a 4 than a 5. He didn't play a ton last season. And then a guy like Trey Morning, who's like a senior, I think like a redshirt senior, very low ceiling, but I mean, as a backup center, he's fine. He's whatever. But I'm going with Antoine Walker for that number 9 spot.
Yeah, I was thinking Walker as well. So maybe Greg Malinowski finds a role as a shooter, especially if they find that a guy like Mosley can be like the backup point guard instead of McClung. Then McClung could fall out of the rotation. That doesn't seem like that's the discussion really at all right now, that McClung would fall out of the rotation. But once again, we have to kind of balance this is what every recruiting expert has said about Mac McClung versus this is the highlight reel from Ball His Life that says he can jump really high.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm shocked that Georgetown didn't go after a grad transfer point guard, or at least didn't land a grad transfer point guard to kind of bridge the gap between having these 2 freshmen, getting a senior in there who can maybe hit some threes, solid defender, maybe not like a super adept creator, but you could play through a guy like Jesse Govan. So that was very surprising. But in terms of where I see Georgetown in the Big East, so I currently have them 8th. But when I compare them directly with Seton Hall, I have a hard time reconciling how I have Seton Hall ahead of them. I don't know if you where do you have Georgetown in relation to the Pirates?
So I have Georgetown 7th in the Big East, mostly because I'm very down on Seton Hall, to the point I'll put out my Big East preview in early October. I wrote it up, I think, Sunday night. I have Seton Hall below Creighton. Like, I'm that down on Seton Hall right now. I just I don't see what they're going to do at point guard that's at all appealing. I don't really like their big man rotation because I'm kind of down on Torian Thompson. Like as I said, their 2 biggest newcomers. This is what I wrote in my article. Their 2 biggest newcomers are Torian Thompson and Quincy McKnight, and I am much lower than consensus on both, which kind of explains why I'm much lower than consensus on Seton Hall. I have them 9th. I have them behind Creighton. I think I'm going to have Georgetown at 7. I'm lower on Georgetown as an NCAA tournament contender after doing this podcast, but I still think I like them better than Seton Hall, and I think I like them better than Creighton as of now, although I'm starting to warm up to Creighton, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so for me, I have 6, 7, and 8 being Seton Hall, Butler, and Georgetown, rammed in very close together on that NCAA tournament bubble. But when I compare Georgetown to Seton Hall, I mean, point guard play, we talked about this earlier, McKnight and Akinjo, probably pretty comparable. Miles Powell, definitely better than Javon Blair. Miles Kale and Caleb Johnson. I think Kale has the better upside, but I think for this season, that's probably a push as well. And then I'm also very down on Torian Thompson. He just wasn't very good at Syracuse. I mean, he's a jump shooter. I don't think a lot of people realize that he's not like a physical post player. He's like a mid-range kind of face-up guy. I think him and Pickett could even be kind of a push. And then Govan is obviously much better than Mama Kilishvili. And I think Georgetown's bench is also superior to Seton Hall's bench. I mean, you have Michael Enzi, who's a kind of a proven commodity on Seton Hall's bench. But then in terms of the backcourt, it's just Anthony Nelson and Jared Roden. So those are top 250 freshmen, top 200 freshmen, kind of in the same range as a Mac McClung. And then that's pretty much Seton Hall's bench. I mean, they have a couple other guys like JUCO transfer Romaro Gill, who's a rim protector, and then Darnell Brody, who's a post grad, like he went to prep school last year. But that's a very uninspiring bench for the Pirates. I think Georgetown has the edge if you compare them like that, and that's why I think I might even flip the two, have Seton Hall closer to where you have them.
Yeah, it's just tough for me to get over some of the flaws that Seton Hall's roster has. They don't have a lot of creation. Their creators are going to turn the ball over. Like, I'm just very down on Seton Hall right now. I'm a little further down on Georgetown just because I think the defense is going to be a real struggle. I think the roster's still like kind of piecing it together, which kind of sucks in the year that Jesse Govan is going to be so good. But the future's still bright in my book. I mean, they're going to have Omer Yurtseven coming in 2019, 2020. Coach Ewing has proven an ability to recruit at a fairly high level. Early in the process, he's involved with a bunch of kids. I know they missed on Isaiah Stewart already. They were trying to get him. They couldn't land Stewart. He cut his list and did not include Georgetown. But just I think Ewing has done a pretty good job overall. Just given what he inherited, I think, as you said, the team was better last year than I think a lot of people expected. I took a lot of heat because I tweeted something after they lost that. I think it was the Syracuse game. Georgetown's lost both close games that they played in. Maybe it's because they haven't been prepared. They haven't prepared to play any close games by playing such a soft non-conference schedule. I think like Maine's head coach Bob Walsh called me out, and I was like in my mind, there was some equivalency there. Like, they just didn't know how to win yet. But at the same time, it was so tough for me to watch, and I think Ewing did a better job with that team, given kind of the flaws that they had that a lot of people gave him credit for, and a lot of people will give him credit for, given they only won 500. I think the future's definitely bright.
It's like if you're a teacher and you give the kids easy homework, and then the test is much harder and the kids fail, is it because they didn't get hard enough homework, or would they have never passed the test even with the harder homework?
Right, yeah. That's a pretty great example, given how poorly I explained what I was trying to say.
Which, I mean, we will never know, which reason for Georgetown's struggles last year. But playing sub 300 teams helps nobody. Playing a soft non-conference schedule does not help anybody except for the checking accounts of the schools that are sub 250 or sub 300 that you are playing. You don't get any confidence. I mean, there's no real long-lasting benefits or confidence. I call BS on that. People say, the team needs to play these cupcakes to get their confidence up. I don't see it.
Yeah, and it's a fairly light schedule this year, though improved from last season. They have Maryland Eastern Shore and Central Connecticut State to open the season. Then for the Gavitt games, they have Illinois in Champaign. Then they go to Jamaica. They have an exempt event that's pretty light. They have Loyola Marymount in South Florida, so scheduled in that event. They've got Campbell, Richmond, Liberty, which will be a pretty good mid-major. They go to Syracuse. They have SMU at home. They have Appalachian State and Little Rock and Howard to close out the non-conference. So still not anything close to a murderer's row, but a slight improvement, if anything, from last season.
So I think that's it for our Georgetown talk. I mean, I don't know if you had anything else, but just to reiterate mine, I have Georgetown 8th in the Big East, which puts them 70th nationally, which makes them a 5 seed in the NIT.
Yeah, I would say mid-NIT sounds about right for me. Not an NCAA tournament team, although if a couple in the range where if a couple things broke right, they could be in consideration. I like the future. I have them 7th in the Big East, and so we'll kind of see what happens with this club. I'm intrigued to see what Akinjo can do because he's such a fun player to watch. I'm intrigued to see what Mac McClung does, and I'm intrigued to see what Patrick Ewing can do in year 2 because they've got a star. They've got an All-American in Jesse Govan. He is outstanding. I think that's all I have as well on Georgetown, and definitely a team I'll be watching when they get those tests early during the non-conference. Maybe that Illinois game, I'll try to sit down and watch a lot of it and get a read on the Hoyas.
Yeah, onto the Vanderbilt Commodores. On the polar opposite in terms of scheduling, Bryce Drew and Vanderbilt always play a tough schedule. I think they were 10th in terms of overall strength of schedule, but they were a senior-laden team that finished 12-20 last year. Very disappointing. Excuse me. And by senior-laden, I mean their 3 leading scorers and probably the 3 best players were seniors: Jeff Roberson, Matthew Fisher-Davis, and Riley LaChance. Roberson was probably the best player when it was all said and done. Fisher-Davis and LaChance had their kind of bright spots in their career, but were largely up and down. So Vanderbilt finished very similarly ranked in KenPom to Georgetown. They were 91st, while Georgetown was 94th, and Vanderbilt was 6-12 in the SEC. They played at a very slow pace, excellent offense, terrible defense, kind of similar to Georgetown as well. They couldn't stop people from 2 or 3, and they were very 3-point reliant last year, even after losing Luke Cornett to the New York Knicks the year before, the super rare shot blocking stretch 5. So they were 42nd in terms of points off threes, 340th off points off 2-point shots, and that's not likely to change this season. And this year they'll be super reliant on their freshman class and newcomers, which Kevin will dive into right now.
Well, before I do the newcomers, I just want to touch on that senior class because I have kind of an interesting relationship with all 3, given my vocalness. There's Riley LaChance, who me and Tony Patelis had a long argument of whether he was better than Brian McIntosh. I said no way, and then after last season, I think he was better last season than Brian McIntosh was that season. Although, I think before that, Brian McIntosh was a better player, and that's when the argument took place. So I'm still claiming a win. Matthew Fisher-Davis, thank you, Matthew Fisher-Davis, for giving Northwestern an NCAA tournament win. That was before I was going to go to Northwestern, but it's still a big moment in the Cats' history. And Luke Cornett, who you mentioned before, he was not even a senior on last year's team, but I still think he was the most overrated player in the history of college basketball. Meanwhile, Jeff Roberson was outstanding, and they're going to miss him a lot. Let's get into the freshman class, though, after that little rant. It's number 13 in the composite rankings nationally. This is an incredible class that Bryce Drew put together in year 2. Nearly was it more incredible if they could have gotten Romeo Langford. They couldn't do it. That was always an uphill battle. This is the 3rd ranked class in the SEC after being 10th the previous year. Simi Shitu is the headliner, the 11th ranked prospect, very athletic forward, originally from Canada, went to prep school at Vermont Academy, had pretty much every big name program involved, chooses the Commodores. Darius Garland, an in-state product out of Tennessee, maybe my favorite point guard in this incoming group, which is a pretty weak incoming point guard class. Very shifty player, very fun to watch at 6'3", 14th in the composite, number 2 in the 24 number 2 in the composite rankings for point guards. And Aaron Nesmith, who a lot of people have said is one of the most underrated players in the class, 6'5" wing, can shoot the ball, 64 in the composite, one not to be slept on in this group. They also have 2 transfers coming in who will be eligible this season after sitting out, and 1 transfer who will sit out this season. They have Matt Ryan from Notre Dame, who is like a combo forward pure shooter, who kind of surprisingly left Notre Dame when he would have had a pretty good role last season. He's there as well as Yanni Wetzel, who is a non-D1 transfer who has gotten a lot of hype from like national media types who talk to a lot of coaches. John Rothstein. And finally, Matt Moyer will sit out this season from Syracuse. Was a very good recruit out of high school, never really put it together for that program. And we'll see if he can put it together after a year to get healthy and a year to really find his stride at Vanderbilt during his redshirt year.
Yeah, so I think that Vanderbilt will start 4 of their newcomers, obviously Garland and Simi Shitu, and then I think both Matt Ryan and Yanni Wetzel get the start at the 3 and the 5 respectively. Wetzel, you mentioned that he's been hyped up a lot. He's 6'10", he can space the floor, he's a skilled post player. The kind of easy comp with him is Cornette, because he's big and he shoots threes, but Cornette I think was a much better defensive player. So don't expect to be getting someone as good as Cornette, but I would say Wetzel's probably a double-figure scorer. And then Ryan, fell out of the rotation as a sophomore at Notre Dame, but I think his shooting is going to be really valuable, kind of in this lineup next to the 2 kind of dual point guard, dual ball handler, dual attacker set with Darius Garland and Saban Lee.
I find it interesting that you think Matt Ryan will start at the 3 because I was thinking more Joe Toye, just because he brings such versatility, athleticism, can switch, especially when you're playing a smaller lineup in the backcourt between Saban Lee, who's 6'2", and Darius Garland, who's 6'3". I think there'd be a lot of benefit in having a Toye who's going to be more of a selfless player and defender. But at the same time, Matt Ryan would give that shooting ability. Then you have four good shooters on the floor at any given time with Lee, Garland, Ryan, and Wetzel around that. Like Shitu's like more of a pure post 4 whose game kind of meshes well with like a stretch 5 in Wetzel. What are your kind of thoughts on Toye's role versus Matt Ryan? I could see you going either way with Ryan as like a shooter off the bench, or Toye bringing energy off the bench, Toye bringing that like athleticism and edginess to the starting lineup versus Ryan's pure spacing.
Yeah, so I actually had Toye in my starting lineup up until yesterday, where I kind of took kind of a look at it, where I think this, Bryce Drew is going to value having shooters, and Saban Lee was kind of a below average shooter. Shitu can shoot a little, but he's probably going to be below average as a freshman. Even a guy like Darius Garland, he's going to have the ball in his hand a lot. You're going to want to space the floor for him. So I think Matt Ryan makes sense, as opposed to having 3 guys in that starting lineup who could be below average shooters. And then Wetzel, he can space the floor, but a lot of times bigs who are floor spacers don't shoot they don't shoot the percentage from 3 that their reputation would indicate. So I think in order to kind of maximize their offense, because the defense is going to be bad. I think it's going to be bad regardless of who they start. I think starting Matt Ryan is definitely the move there.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. As far as kind of rounding out a rotation, I think Nesmith will be in the rotation. I think they'll probably wind up with Obina in the rotation as like a backup big man, just because of the lack of depth. And then just kind of rounding it out, I would say probably obviously Toye or Ryan, whoever doesn't wind up getting that starting spot. That'd be like an 8-man. They only do have 11 scholarship players, so 8 might be all they play. They could kind of extend to 9 with Clavon Brown in that back as another backup big. I was actually fairly high on Obina at one point, so I'm kind of leaning towards him, and he got a fair good amount of minutes last season in and out of the rotation. So it'll be interesting to see which one kind of establishes himself as that backup big for playing time.
Yeah, I think that they're probably just going to play. They have 10 guys, right, who are either deserving of minutes given their reputation coming in, or guys who are returners and played rotation roles last year, even though that they might seem, like a Maxwell Evans or a Obina or a Cleveon Brown, who may seem like they're on the outside looking into the rotation, but playing double-digit minutes consistently last year. I could see Bryce Drew just playing all like finding room for all 10 of these guys. But if we're projecting our 8, I would go with the starters I mentioned: Garland, Lee, Ryan, Shitu, and Wetzel, and then Toy. I guess Toy, Neesmith, and Obina would be my 8. Clivion Brown 9, and then Evans 10. But Evans, he could earn time because he's really their only clear 2 guard off the bench. Where Garland comes out of the game, Saban Lee moves up to the point guard. They could go with like an Aaron Neesmith or a Joe Toy there at that 2 spot, but they're not really the ideal fits in terms of handling the ball and stuff. So maybe Maxwell Evans could carve out a little role there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you're probably right that they could just they may not have like a set rotation as much as they'll have more like situational usage of guys like Evans, Brown, Obina, to kind of round out the rotation after. I think the clear top 7 of Toy, or not top 7 to 8 with like Garland, Lee, Toy, Neesmith, Shitu, and Yanni Wetzel, and Matt Ryan.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest weakness of this team would be defense. But then secondly, I think just kind of like the overall youth of this team, where it's very freshman and sophomore reliant. Kind of their more experienced guys look to be guys coming off the bench. Even like an older guy like Yanni Wetzel, this is his first year in the program. So I think that between their defensive shortcomings, they're just being so reliant on freshmen, even though they are NBA prospects. They are different players to this, but DeJounte Murray and Marcus Chris for Washington, 2 big-time NBA prospects on a team, couldn't get any traction in terms of team success. Although, I mean, Bryce Drew's a better coach than Lorenzo Romar. But I think the team around them at Washington was probably a little better than the supporting cast here at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I mean, the youth is certainly a concern. I think Garland's kind of one of those point guards where I trust him beyond his age as a freshman, where I think he's very ready to go. I don't think like DeJounte Murray, for instance, if we're using that Washington comparison, was anywhere near as like ready to run a team in college as Darius Garland. So I think that's what they have that going for them. I'm a little concerned just kind of with overall spacing. It feels a little similar to Georgetown in the regard of like you're sacrificing one thing to get the other between like Ryan and Toy. Like you feel like they need Toy for the defense, but you also need Matt Ryan spacing because you don't know how Shitu's going to shoot the ball. Wetzel will get some limited attempts. Garland's a solid shooter. Lee an okay shooter. I think he'll improve this year. Like I don't know how all these pieces fit together. And I think the other concern, and it's not necessarily something that Vanderbilt did wrong, the SEC is super strong this year. I think a lot of years just bringing in a Garland and bringing in a Simi Shitu would be enough to really contend. I mean, even if those guys are fringe all SEC players, this is still not like a clear top 5 team in the SEC, which is where you'd expect a group like that. I mean, to me, I haven't done as much on the SEC in terms of like building a standings as I had with the Big East, but it's tough for me to feel like this is even necessarily top 7 in this conference, and that's not necessarily a criticism of Vanderbilt because they could easily wind up in the NCAA tournament. I think I'd probably have them in if it started today, but I mean Auburn's going to be better than them. I think Tennessee clearly better. I take Florida over them. I take Kentucky over them, obviously. Arkansas, I would take Vanderbilt well over Arkansas. I would take them over Missouri. I'd take Mississippi State. I would take Mississippi State over Vanderbilt. I would take Vanderbilt over A&M. I would take like Alabama. Well, who would you take, Alabama or Vandy? I think I'd take Bama. Me as well, yeah. LSU, I'd take LSU over Vandy. South Carolina.
I would say Vanderbilt, but that one is closer than I think people realize.
Yeah, I would agree. And then Ole Miss, same thing. So like, that would be having Georgia, Vanderbilt at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 below in a 14-team league. That would have them at 8th. And like, that seems right.
Yeah, I think that there's no way that you can have them higher than 7. I don't see, there's that consensus top 6, who I think should be in everybody's top 25, and then Alabama I think is right outside it at 7. The earliest you can have Vanderbilt 8. I don't think that there was any argument about Vanderbilt being better than any of those 7 teams. And then you have teams like, Missouri. I think you could make an argument is better than Vanderbilt. I had Missouri before their kind of wing depth took a hit recently. I'm considering moving Missouri down. I think you could have South Carolina ahead of Vanderbilt. You could certainly make an argument for that. Certainly won't be a offensive argument, but it would be a defensive argument with the Gamecocks. Georgia's a veteran team, or at least they have a ton of returning players. There are certainly options, and the SEC is going to be very strong top to bottom. Even the team that a lot of people have in last, Ole Miss, has a lot of talent. They have Terrence Davis, who's an NBA prospect. Bruce Stevens is a senior who had a big year last year. So the strength of the SEC will absolutely hurt Vanderbilt as well. And I really like Garland and Shitu, especially Shitu, or Shitu, however you pronounce his name. He's an athletic four-man. He handles the ball. I love big men that can handle the ball. He'll attack. He can shoot a little bit. I'm very high on both those players, but just having 2 NBA prospects who are freshmen, it's not enough. You need some additional supporting cast, and I think you touched on this earlier, but the fit of this supporting cast, not only around Garland and Shitu, but just the fit overall is very questionable.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think 8th is where I'll wind up putting them in my preseason rankings. Just because of that overall talent level. I'm a big Bryce Drew guy. I think he's a really good coach. I think you'll find a way with this group to be competitive. And 8th in the SEC, it's not a for sure an NCAA tournament bid, but it's definitely in the conversation. Which is, would you have them in that NCAA tournament right now? I don't know where you have them right now in your top 100. I know you have in the bank somewhere.
So I have them 54th nationally, which puts them as a 2 seed in the NIT. Currently have them 9th in the SEC, but I think I'm going to move them in front of Missouri. But that would be me moving Missouri down in the rankings, so that 54th I think is where I feel comfortable with Vanderbilt, just outside the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think that's fairly that's fair. I like Garland enough. I'm such a big Garland guy, and I've always been a guy who will stand for a team with a really good point guard over any other incoming player. I think Garland's impact will be huge on this team. I think they'll be a lot better just as an offensive unit. They weren't all that efficient last season. LaChance was good, but they were kind of tanked by Fisher Davis's inefficiency and things like that. So we'll see what happens there. I think I'd probably have him as an 8th in the SEC and sneaking into the NCAA tournament in the 10 to 11 seed range. But that 2 seed in the NIT sounds pretty fair as well.
In terms of comparing them to other bubble teams, do you like Vanderbilt more than a Butler?
Ooh, I wrote my Big East preview the other day, and I'm jumping in on the Butler thing. So probably not. I would take Butler.
Yeah, I think I would also take Butler slightly ahead of Vanderbilt. How about Arizona?
Ooh. Roster-wise, I think I would take Vanderbilt's roster, and I think coaching up a roster, I would take Vanderbilt as well, but Arizona will have a much less resistance path in the Pac-12 to finding wins that will still probably rank well in terms of the quadrant system. That it's tough for me to say Arizona has a better a worse chance of getting to the NCAA tournament than Vanderbilt, if that makes sense.
All right, and then we'll do 2 more. Notre Dame.
Ooh, I think I'd take Vandy.
Okay, and then lastly, I have Notre Dame two spots ahead of Vanderbilt.
All right.
So they're like very, very even for me. Slight edge for the Fighting Irish. And then lastly, St. Louis.
Oh, I got to give me Vandy. I'm not taking any Travis Ford team over this group.
I'm taking St. Louis over them.
Really? You're big on St. Louis.
I have them like 42, 43-ish.
Ooh, that is
like 10 or 11 seed.
That is high.
It sounds high, like when you're like, oh, you have them 40, whatever. But I mean, it's a 10 seed or like an 11 seed, So like,
yeah,
those are the teams that like people are saying like don't deserve to get in. Let's contract the NCAA tournament. But when you frame it as, oh, this is a top 45 team in college basketball, it's like, oh yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah, I buy that. Bryce Drew, where do we stand as we do with every coach in this mix? Obviously, the recruiting he's done has been tremendous. I was actually in a discussion. I don't know if you saw those articles that CBS Sports has been putting out of like the next to replace X like blue blood coach.
Oh, I saw the Michigan State one.
They had the Michigan State one. It was the worst thing I've ever read. Like can you actually look me in the face and tell me that you think that Brian Gregory and Mark Montgomery are candidates to take over for Tom Izzo when both are legitimately bad basketball coaches? Like, oh my God. I could not believe what I was reading. I was thinking about it before I went to bed last night, and the name that came to mind, like 5 years from now, would be probably when we're talking about Izzo moving on. Bryce Drew. Knows the area, great recruiter, national recruiter. I think it's a great fit.
Yeah, the whole thing with that Michigan State article, it's a very easy game. All right. Dana Fife, okay. Right? Lead assistant, whatever, he gets a spot. Then just pick 4 mid-major coaches.
Nate Oates, perfect example. He's
Nate
coached
Oates,
in that area.
Ben Jacobson, Greg Marshall, although Wichita State, might be too high now. But I mean, Michigan State's a very good job. I don't know about like the uncertainty with the leadership revolving all this rape stuff, but just pick 4 successful mid-major coaches. There you go. I mean, Brian Gregory. It went from like, all right, Dana Fife, that makes sense. Tom Crean, like maybe, but I wouldn't have put Tom Crean there. I wouldn't even have thought of Tom Crean for there. And then Brian Gregory, like what? He couldn't do Georgia Tech. He can't do South Florida. Let's give him a third shot.
They did one about Syracuse, and like I sort of understood Rob Murphy getting like on that list. I don't think he's done good enough at Eastern Michigan where it made sense for him to be on it. But I sort of understood like, oh, they're going to hire from within. Like Rob Murphy's been a head coach. If he got to an NCAA tournament, it's not crazy. Like Mark Montgomery, like his only qualification is I once was an assistant at Michigan State. Like he has been legit bad at Northern Illinois. He has a sub 400 winning percentage at Northern Illinois. He has not been mediocre. He has been flat out bad. Like the fact that you like consider yourself a college basketball analyst and considered Mark Montgomery a legit candidate. If you wanted to say Michigan State's going to hire from within, that's fine. Then say Dane Fife or Dwayne Stevens, and that's who's getting the job unless someone emerges. That's all you had to say. If you want to throw out other names who are actually qualified, throw out a Bryce Drew, throw out a Nate Oates, throw out a Greg Marshall, throw out, these are big jobs that no one's going to turn down. Throw out a Billy Donovan. I think Billy Donovan's going to be involved on every single one of these big jobs. He's going to wind up the head coach of either Michigan State, Syracuse, Duke, Kansas. When that opens, Billy Donovan's going to come back to college coaching. That's my bold prediction. Like, throw out names that make sense. These guys' only connection was I know the program. You hire coaches not just because they know the program. It was such a bad list.
It doesn't even need to be realistic. Just pick 5 mid-major coaches who've been to the NCAA tournament from the area. Right? I just to say, all right, Syracuse, Nate Oates, Tim Cluse, take a lead assistant and then be like guy from Ryder. I don't know, just like throw out teams that have been at the top of the conference, and it would be better than let's do a retread who's on his fourth try, who I was shocked even got the South Florida job, and then a guy in Mark Montgomery who I didn't realize that was a bad pick because it's how far off the radar he was.
Yeah, let's loop it back to kind of wrap things up here. Let's do the Vanderbilt schedule. They start with Winthrop, then they have at USC on the opening weekend on Sunday of opening weekend. Alcorn State a bye game at home, Liberty a bye game at home, Kent State a bye game, Savannah State a bye game. Then they have the Hoop Hall Miami Invitational, so like a one-day event in Miami and North Carolina State. They have Middle Tennessee State. They have Arizona State on December 17th in Nashville, Kansas State in Kansas City. So some sort of neutral game that won't be all that neutral on December 22nd. Tennessee State a bye game, UNC Asheville a bye game. So this is a lighter slate than what they've been used to. They only leave home 3 times, and only one of those games is a true road game with that trip to LA to play USC. Both that North Carolina State and Kansas State game are technically a neutral court game. So they do have their fair share of tests, but definitely lighter than some of the Vanderbilt schedules we've seen in the past. This is probably the first year Bryce Drew had a lot of say on the schedule, so that is interesting to note.
Yep, and in terms of Bryce Drew's future, I think this is a year where they don't really need to make the NCAA tournament, but making it would certainly solidify him in their long term. I mean, Vanderbilt is a tough job and shouldn't be compared to the other SEC jobs in terms of getting to the NCAA tournament so frequently. I mean, there is a trend now with schools like Harvard, even like Penn picked up a pretty highly ranked recruit the other day, that these high academic schools have been getting more highly ranked recruits, but Vanderbilt's still probably the toughest job there in the SEC.
Yeah, I think the one other thing to note with the academic point you made was these academic schools high academic schools are gaining a push on the recruiting trail, partially because they're starting to relax some of those standards to get kids in. They're still taking good academic kids, but the kids that are Northwestern is taking, that Harvard are taking, that Penn are taking, have good grades. They don't have Penn grades. I mean, none of them do, but they've definitely relaxed them in recent years. I read an article about how Harvard's relaxed them a little bit. Vanderbilt has been a school that has consistently been hesitant to put athletics first. And I'm not suggesting that any of these schools are putting athletics first, but they've had trouble funding for a new football stadium. Their basketball stadium is very old. It's an interesting job to be at because it's such a clash between academics and athletics. Bryce Drew is doing a good job recruiting there. I think he'll continue to do a good job. They're involved with a lot of good 2019 kids. I don't think his future is in any doubt. If he continues to land these talents, unless he completely underwhelms, which I don't anticipate him doing, it may take a little time because he almost landed 2 good players this round, where he landed such good 2018 kids that those 2 guys might be great, go one and done, and then Vanderbilt almost has to start all over with Aaron Neesmith and whatever they can land in 19. Like it's a bit of a challenge where like you could all of a sudden Bryce Drew could have kind of underwhelmed and like almost needs this end. I think it's more important that he gets to an NCAA tournament than you do because there's a chance they don't make it next year, and it's tough to go 3 years in a row at any high major without getting to the NCAA tournament. People start to talk. So I think a tournament bid this year would be very big.
Though they don't have any seniors, I don't think so.
Joe Toy is the only one, yeah.
Toy, and then Garland and Chitu could be one and dones, but they have 2 top 150 recruits with Austin Crowley and Dylan Dizu. Dizu's like a stretch 4, kind of a wing type, probably similar to Matt Ryan there. Then Crowley's like a big combo guard. So that the recruiting's been okay. Obviously, no 5 stars in 2019, but I think Vanderbilt's in a pretty good shape.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that wraps us up today, Brad, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Pound that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts. Give us a nice review. We do appreciate it. Really helps others find the podcast. Over the next couple weeks, as I said, we're going to get started into conference tournament previews. We do still have a couple of teams we want to deep dive in. Probably do that late this week, early next week, and then get into those conference previews because we want to do all the power conferences. We want to do some sort of mid-major preview, and we're going to try to get on some good guests throughout that. We'll be guests on other podcasts, and we'll be sure to share those podcasts on Twitter. guests on some radio shows, hopefully going into the season, doing our written work over it. You'll be at Busting Brackets, Brad, and I'll be over on my site at cbcentral.com. I'll have my 32 conference previews, one per day, starting October 1st. I'm already slaving away working on those. So it's an exciting time of year. I know Rothstein has it at like 7 days till college basketball officially starts. College basketball starts in less than 50 days. Let's just put it that way. We're in the 40s now. We're in the home stretch. College football is back, and we're watching practices are coming up. We're getting these Rothstein practice reports that are overly positive. It's all coming back. This is how college basketball is supposed to work. We're supposed to be hearing how great every team looks from John Rothstein, and how there are going to be 120 teams in the NCAA tournament. Thanks for listening, everybody. Once again, subscribe, like, whatever you got to do. Keep us going on the podcast. Appreciate your support. Have a great night.